Jane in Wraysbury. Hello, Jane.
Hello, Nick.
Hello.
Good to talk to you today. I'm hoping to get a little bit more clarity from you than I got from your colleague, Ed Miliband, earlier this week.
Right.
He was very, very keen to give me a lot of political platitudes this week about the wonderful things that were going to happen and how the government was going to help everyone that was a victim of the flooding, as I am myself. But I'm really keen to understand...
What's happened, Jane? Sorry, can I interrupt? What's happened to your home or your business?
My house has been in 6 inches of floodwater for the whole of this week, actually. So we're living upstairs at the moment. Since Saturday night.
Right.
So we're approaching a week of hell at the moment.
I can imagine.
But I loved David Cameron's quote the other day about money is no object. Equally loved yours a second ago that charity begins at home. But really keen to understand what that practically means. And let me explain what I mean by that quite specifically. So I spoke to one of the heads of the Environment Agency earlier this week who was visiting Wraysbury. And he was very keen to tell me that he is desperate for £120 million of funding to complete the Thames Relief Scheme. What are you guys going to do about that?
The Thames Relief Scheme?
Yes.
And that would affect Wraysbury, would it?
That would significantly help us in future should we be at risk of further flooding. So it would do a lot to help flooding along quite a large part of the Thames Valley.
Sure. Well, Jane, as you can imagine, I'm not a sort of river expert, so I don't know that much about the specific scheme, which has been obviously, I guess, worked up and designed and now needs to be implemented and funded. But what I can tell you is that the need for the Environment Agency and the need for this government and indeed future governments to do more to protect those parts of the country which are susceptible to flooding is just self-evidently the case. Now, part of that is about doing the right thing. It's different in different places. I haven't been to visit Wraysbury, but I certainly know in other parts of the country that I've been to, there's a lot of, there's a long-standing debate about whether you dredge or you don't dredge, whether you introduce tidal sluices when you're near coasts, whether you change farming patterns on higher ground where the water flows off.
May I ask you a direct question on that? And I apologise for interrupting you.
Sure.
But are you in support of dredging? Yes or no?
Where it makes a difference, of course, absolutely. Of course. Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes or no? That was a very political answer, but is it a yes or a no?
Well, Jane, I'm sorry, I don't regard dredging as a sort of universal rule where it makes a difference. And so, for instance, I think in the Parrett and the Tone in the southern Somerset levels, I think it's obvious that they should have been dredged, and it was with hindsight a mistake that they weren't dredged for many years. So I think that's
great.
But it's great. But all I would say is that people who know more about that than I do, who live, for instance, next to those rivers, would tell you, Jane, never mind from me, and they're non-politicians, that dredging alone would not be the magic wand answer. You'd need to do other things as well as the...
Okay, and I understand that, but I actually am one of the people who live next to a river. I live 50 metres away from the Thames, so I completely understand that. I get the arguments. However, there is an irrefutable fact that dredging in certain parts of the country, and I do agree with you, it isn't a universal fix-all. Dredging in certain parts of this country would be enormously helpful. However, as far as I understand it, there isn't one serviceable dredger working in this country right now. Under the Blair government, they made an active decision to stop that from happening. So Labour and Tony Blair decided we will no longer dredge. When is the government currently going to make good on that bad decision?
Well, clearly we will need not just one serviceable dredger. We'll need more as we get dredging again after the floodwaters subside. So clearly that needs to be fixed. And you're quite right, Jane, in saying that there is some equipment that we've had to look elsewhere. We've had to look abroad to bring into the United Kingdom to help us. So that you've had these Dutch hydraulics experts who've come in with these huge industrial scale pumps to help pump a lot of the flood water away from parts of the south west. As you know, each part of the country is different. So again, you live 50 metres away from the Thames. I am told, you'll know better than me, that one of the issues with flooding in the Thames is that the water can basically reappear. If you like, it seeps through the gravel and reappears several metres, maybe even scores of metres away from the actual river bank. So you can't sort of cut off the water in ways that you might with other waterways and other rivers. So you do need to have. This is back to your original question. You need to have schemes which work for each place. Now, the Thames Relief Scheme, I will look into it. Of course I will. I know the Environment Agency, DEFRA, and the government will look into this, as we will look into everything, as we will review what went right and what went wrong after this immediate emergency has subsided. Because, of course, we need to learn the lessons from the past. Of course, we need to get them right. And, of course, we need to do everything we can to protect people in the future.
Jane, are you the Jane who's after meeting Ed Miliband said, "I've never felt like hitting someone so much in my life"?
Yes, I'm afraid I am.
Right. Now that you've spoken with Nick Clegg, how do you respond to Mr. Clegg's responses to you?
Well, I'm really, really happy to hear, Nick, that there's going to be something done about this. However, I would caveat this with a fairly healthy level of scepticism.
Sure.
I hear a lot of politicians talking about things that will happen, but they never seem to happen. So what I would dearly love today, Mr. Clegg, is to hear you give a firm commitment about what exactly is going to be done next.
Yeah.
Funding the Environment Agency to make sure this does not happen again.
Right, Jane. I mean, look. I mean, I've got to be really blunt with you, Jane. I can give you some reassurance that money into for flood defences is going up, is not going down. We're spending whatever it is, £2.4 billion over this 4-year period, compared to a bit less over the last 4-year period. I can totally reassure you that we're going to review everything from top to toe to understand this. I cannot now, self-evidently, tell you what that review will conclude. So in that sense, I can't cross the T's and dot the I's right now. I remember, by the way, as a constituency MP, I represent a part of the country quite a long way from your home, Jane, up in Sheffield, and we had terrible floodings in 2007. They were they were brutal. A number of people died, including a young boy in my constituency who was swept away by a river that had burst its banks. We then, the government at the time, to be fair, I mean, there was lots of criticism. Did they act fast enough? Did they not act fast enough? New money was put forward. A review was commissioned. New legislation was passed. I guess what I'm not going to ask myself, and I guess we all are, is that despite all of those previous reviews and new legislation and new arrangements, which flowed from those terrible floods back in 2007, in many respects it feels as if, like Groundhog Day, we're back to where we were. Though frankly, it's affecting a different part of the country. Then it really affected parts of the north rather than the south. So what I will make sure, Jane, as Deputy Prime Minister, is that as we review these things after this, that we do so in a way which does lead to lasting change, where we can make that change and where we can afford it and where we can deliver it.
Jane, thank you for your call.